On the west coast of Turkey lies one of the biggest Roman sites in the world, Ephesus. In its heyday, it was considered the second most important city in the Roman Empire. Today, it sits in a fertile valley, 5 kilometers from the coast, but back then, it was right on the coastline, giving it direct access to the Aegean Sea and making it a bustling port and center of commerce. Unlike many Roman cities which today are covered by modern cities, Ephesus was abandoned and disappeared under the dust, so it was preserved as a Roman ruin, only to be excavated in modern times. So what happened to it, and what caused its slow retreat from the coastline? If you watch my video on Caesarea, which is Israel's most impressive Roman ruin, you will learn that Caesarea was established in the 1st century BC. Ephesus, however, was almost 1,000 years old by that point. Everything you see there today is Roman, but it's even older than Rome itself. It was originally a Greek city, founded by Ionian Greeks in the 10th century BC, during the Dark Age of Greece's history, which lasted from around 1100 until 800 BC. There was no writing in Greece during the Dark Age, so the origins of Ephesus are murky. But what we do know from archaeology is that the Dark and Archaic Ages were periods of mass migration from the Greek heartland and the establishment of many Greek colonies on the coasts of Anatolia, Libya, southern Italy, Sicily, and even the Black Sea in southern France. Ephesus was one of the very first colonies, founded around 950 BC. There existed in the Greek heartland a variety of different dialects of the Greek language, including the Doric dialect, Ionic, Attic, and Aeolic. These cultural groups exported their dialects and cultural variations to the colonies they founded. It was the Ionian Greeks who founded Ephesus, as well as other colonies on that coast. And so this became known as the Ionian coast, the part in green. During the Archaic Age, they became rich and powerful cities, and were major players in the Greek-speaking world. They also had a strong influence on the Lycian civilization southeast of them. Watch my video on the Lycians to learn about them. This is the site of Roman Ephesus. What's interesting is that the original Greek city was actually here, 2 kilometers away, where the modern town of Selçuk is. During the Archaic Age, the coastline looked something like this, so this fertile valley was actually a bay, and the archaic Greek city was right on the waterfront. With time, the river deposited sediment and filled the bay with rich, fertile soil, pushing the coastline farther and farther to the west. And so this was the coastline during the Classical Age, Hellenistic Age, Roman, Byzantine, and Middle Ages. It was during this archaic period that Ephesus became an important cultural and commercial center. This was a period when much of ancient Greece began to flourish. The Phoenician alphabet was adopted and modified into the ancient Greek alphabet that we know today, and art and architecture developed rapidly. The style of Greek temples that we know so well was developed during the Archaic period. It was also during the Archaic period that Ephesus became a major center for the cult of Artemis, the Greek goddess of the hunt, childbirth, wild animals, and the wilderness. In antiquity, the word cult did not have the same negative connotation that it has today. It simply meant the worship of a particular deity. Artemis was one of the most important Greek goddesses and twin sister of Apollo. Apollo and Artemis were the children of Zeus and Leto. Leto was a deity who, according to myth, was born at the site of Litoon in Lycia. This later became an important sanctuary for her cult. Zeus impregnated Leto, but she had trouble giving birth because Zeus's wife Hera was furious and jealous, and aggressively pursued her. Leto eventually found refuge on the island of Delos, where she gave birth to the twins. Because of this, Delos became a key religious center for the worship of the twins, but the most important center for the worship of Apollo was at Delphi. And the most important center for Artemis was at Ephesus. This was the site of the Temple of Artemis, on the edge of the modern town, where the original Greek city was. You can still see the outline of the temple, but almost nothing is left, apart from this lonely old column that's reconstructed from various column drums found on site. But when it existed, it was the largest temple in the Mediterranean, and one of the 7 ancient wonders of the world. There were 3 generations at the temple. This illustration represents the last and biggest one. To give you an idea of just how big it was, the Parthenon in Athens, which is a large temple, is 69 meters long and 31 meters wide. The Temple of Artemis had the width that was as big as the length of the Parthenon, 69 meters, and it was 137 meters long, making it 4 times bigger than the Parthenon. And in terms of total size, if this was the Parthenon, then this was the Temple of Artemis, 8 times bigger in volume. It was a monster. Its massive columns were made up of individual column drums stacked on top of each other, and reaching a height of 18 meters. When building the temple, they would have had to lift each column drum and fit them one by one to create a forest of marble columns, then top them off with massive Ionic capitals, the signature architectural feature of the Ionian cities. This decorative motif became so popular, it was adopted in the rest of the Greek world and became part of the canon of Greek architecture. It was also adopted by the Romans and is still used widely in modern neoclassical architecture, so it's the most lasting cultural legacy that the Ionian cities left us. These ones are actually from the Temple of Artemis, housed in the British Museum, which publishes their dimensions on their website. So I took this info, together with the density of marble, and calculated that each capital weighed between 10 and 12 tons. That's how much a semi-truck weighs. So it's like lifting a semi-truck to a height of 6 or 7 stories. With technology of 2,500 years ago. Just to blow your mind even further, Imperial Rome, with all its wealth and engineering mastery, never built a temple as big as the Temple of Artemis. It was an imperial-scale project achieved by a single city-state. That was Ephesus. The Artemis of Ephesus, by the way, was quite different than what we typically associate with a Greek goddess. She was fused together with an Anatolian goddess named Cybele to look like this, whereas this depiction of her is from the Hellenistic and Roman periods. The city became known as Servant of the Goddess. It hosted a festival in her honor during the springtime, which attracted thousands of pilgrims from all over the Greek world. It was called the Artemisia and included religious rites and sacrifices, processions through the city that carried images of her, athletic competitions, dance, music, and theater performances. It was deeply ingrained in the city's religious and cultural traditions, lasting for well over 1,000 years, from as early as the 8th century BC and until Christianity extinguished it in the 4th century AD. For most of the Archaic period, Ephesus stood as a proud and independent city, and it was the Ephesians themselves who funded the construction of the first temple, which was more modest. With time, however, it fell into disrepair and needed an upgrade. Then in 560 BC, Ephesus was conquered by King Croesus of Lydia, which was a small empire in the western half of Anatolia. With its capital at Sardis, Lydia was a very wealthy empire and is credited with minting the very first coins in history. Croesus was a benevolent ruler. Being such a wealthy king, he sponsored the construction of a new temple. This second version was much larger and more impressive. However, Croesus had one fatal flaw. Around this time, the Persian Empire was the eastern neighbor of Lydia. Legend has it that Croesus went to consult the oracle at Delphi, and he asked it whether he should attack the Persians in order to enlarge his own empire. The priestess of the oracle, known as the Pythia, replied,
"If you attack, you will destroy a mighty empire."
Overconfident in the answer, he attacked the Persians, who were led by Cyrus the Great, and you don't want to mess with Cyrus the Great. Croesus suffered utter defeat, and his own empire, Lydia, was destroyed. This story is often cited as a classic example of hubris. His actions not only brought the downfall of his own empire, but also awoke a sleeping giant, and provoked the Persians to continue westward and swallow up the rest of Anatolia, including Ephesus and the other Greek city-states. It also affected Lycia to the south, which was swallowed up as well. But as much as Croesus had a role to play in attracting the Persians westward, the Ionian cities had their own role to play in triggering a butterfly effect. Being a far-flung territory of the Persian Empire, the Ionian cities were mostly left alone as long as they paid taxes to the Persians. But when taxes were raised too much, the city of Miletus revolted. Other Ionian cities joined, and this escalated into a full war. Athens sent forces to help their Greek brothers, and they clashed at the Battle of Ephesus in 498 BC, not far from the city. The Persians won that battle, but the revolt dragged on for several years. It was eventually crushed, and the Ionian cities were subdued. But now that the Persians had come into direct conflict with Athens, their eyes were set on mainland Greece as well. And this escalated into the wider Greco-Persian War so famous in history, which included the epic battles of Marathon, Thermopylae, and Salamis. The Greco-Persian War was a defining moment in Greek history and self-identity. They defeated and ousted the Persians from their homeland. But the Ionian cities stayed under their yoke for 150 more years, until Alexander the Great launched his campaign against the Persians and pushed them out of Anatolia in 334 BC. Alexander was welcomed triumphantly into Ephesus as a great liberator. By this point, the Temple of Artemis was in ruins, destroyed not by the Persians, but by fire set off by a crazed arsonist 22 years earlier. And according to legend, on the night Alexander was born. When the 22-year-old Alexander saw the state of the temple, he offered to pay for rebuilding it. But afraid to be indebted to him, the Ephesians refused his generous offer, claiming that it would not be proper for one god, Alexander, to build a temple to another god, Artemis. Refusal through flattery. After Alexander's death in 323, the Ephesians went ahead and funded the construction of the third temple with their own money. This third temple was the biggest of them all, and it was this version that earned it the reputation as one of the 7 wonders of the world. When Alexander died, he left no heir, and so his empire was split up between his generals. This was the start of the Hellenistic Age, a period when the Eastern Mediterranean would be ruled by these Greek-speaking dynasties that came after Alexander. They often fought each other over territory, and so the borders constantly changed. And this piece of the pie, where Ephesus was, came under the control of a man named Lysimachus. By now, around 290 BC, the coastline had moved away from the city because the river was silting up the bay. This killed the port, and the marshes left behind also caused malaria. So Lysimachus built a brand new city 2 kilometers away, in a more strategic position between 2 mountains and a natural harbor. He tried to convince the Ephesians to move to his new city, but they didn't want to leave. So Lysimachus allegedly plugged the sewage system of the old city during a storm, blocking drainage and flooding it. If this story is true, then his trick worked, and it forced the Ephesians to move to the new city. This new relocated Ephesus continued to be an important city during the Hellenistic Age, and formed the foundation for the later Roman city, which is when it reached its peak, and is the topic of my next video, Roman Ephesus.